Tonight, when we were all tucked into our little beds, an earthquake magnitude 9 or higher could hit the shores of British Columbia. It will be a megathrust quake and tsunami that can and probably will kill thousands of us from here to Victoria, Seattle, Portland, and Sacramento, perhaps. This quake could also hold off for 50 more years. Jerry Thompson is a writer, director, and journalist who studies killer waves and quakes. He has written a book called Cascadia's Fault. It is my pleasure to welcome Jerry Thompson to Studio 4 to tell us more. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Good morning.
We were cub reporters at the CBC, as I recall.
A few years back, yeah.
Yes.
But we won't go into that.
Beating our way down the street.
Yes, indeed.
What intrigued you about earthquakes and tsunamis? And
you know, before I actually got assigned to do this by the CBC, I knew nothing about it. I took exactly one Geology 101 course in university and was vaguely familiar with this idea of continental drift. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, if you take the coast of Africa and just slide it across the Atlantic, it looks like it fits up against South America. And if you turn Florida around a little bit, you could jam it into the Gulf of, to the Mediterranean Sea. And, you know, this a whole big puzzle of how continents would be sliding around and all that kind of stuff. But when I took it, you know, in university a million years ago, it was still sort of a theory. It wasn't proven. And then when in 1985, there was a big earthquake in Mexico City. And I happened to be in New York at the time covering Afghan soldiers who had defected to the US. And while I was in New York, this big earthquake happens, and my friend Rob Douglas, a cameraman, was sent right to Mexico City, and he called me from there a day or two later, and he said, can you imagine standing at the base of a 20 or 30-story building and watching it go back and forth like trees in a big windstorm? And, you know, it was just such a bizarre experience. So I didn't go to Mexico City, but about 2 weeks later, they sent me to Victoria, to the Pacific Geoscience Center, to find out what did the scientists learn in Mexico City. The short answer was they were wrong about Mexico City. That slab of the ocean floor that caused that big earthquake, and it was like 200 some odd kilometers away from Mexico City, out underneath the ocean. They said, well, we had always thought this was not going to cause a big earthquake because in all of recorded history, it had never happened before, and the theory was, well, maybe there was something lubricating these two big plates, and they weren't stuck together. And, well, if we were wrong about Mexico, we were probably wrong about Cascadia. And I said, what's Cascadia? I mean, I knew nothing about it, eh? And so they said to me, well, Cascadia is exactly like Mexico, that whole ring of fire thing around the Pacific Ocean. You've got the ocean floor trying to scrape under the continent, and we've never seen an earthquake in Cascadia in all of recorded history. So we thought, well, maybe it's aseismic. It doesn't cause earthquakes, not to worry. Well, now we've changed our mind. The risk factor for Vancouver and Victoria suddenly went, and this is like live, while we're filming an interview for the Journal.
Yes.
The camera's rolling, and the first thing the guy says to me, this is the lab director, he kind of looks at his buddies that are sitting around the table, and he says, should we tell him? I said, tell me what? I mean, you know, the camera's rolling, pal, you gotta tell me now. And he says, well, we're gonna say that the risk factor for a magnitude 8 or higher earthquake is no longer 50-50, it's 70-30 in favor. And I thought, wow, I never even heard the 50-50 part.
No, 70-30 sounds like a lot.
Yes, and now it's 100%.
Not good, it's 100%.
Oh, they know it's gonna happen. It's just a question of when would it happen?
When, and who studies the when part?
A lot of people, and
I'm
they
sure
still
they
haven't
do.
figured it out yet.
So they can't predict it, really?
Not really.
And there's erroneous predictions, of
Yep.
course. What's going on under there with these plates in this zone?
If you go back,
I know you're not a geoscientist,
no, I'm not,
but
I've had to do this story 6 times in 25 years, and I've gone back and updated the science as it changed each time.
Right.
That old theory of continental drift, which had been kind of dismissed as lunacy, was finally proven to be true. The bottom of the ocean floor, this big slab of crust called the Juan de Fuca plate, is trying to scrape under the edge of North America.
Right.
It gets down there and it gets stuck, and friction makes these two things stick together. And after hundreds of years of this friction, finally the rocks fail, and the edge of the continent pops loose, jerks up, creates this huge, you know, earthquake that is different from any of the ones you've seen in California, because this one starts up above Tofino and goes all the way down the coast, clear down to Cape Mendocino, California.
Great.
Ah.
So the quake hunters know that Cascadia's fault has ruptured in the past.
Yep.
They know that much. The tsunami will definitely come with all of this because
They
it's
can't
just
say
impossible
definitely,
for. Oh, they
but
can't
probably.
say definitely, but
because
probably.
you see, when the ocean floor, if you imagine the outer edge of the continents, you got Vancouver Island, and then beyond the island, there's the continental shelf, which is underwater.
Right.
And that part has been bent down and pulled under, and when it pops loose, it lifts up the ocean water with it, and that's what causes a tsunami. Sometimes it moves more horizontally than it does vertically, so there are these times when it doesn't create a tsunami, and they don't really know why.
Okay, and sometimes the tsunami is 30 meters high.
That's right.
Like in Japan.
Exactly.
So you must get away.
And so what we saw there is what you're going to see here.
Ooh. But we don't know when, as you say.
Right.
But when that ring of fire ruptures, when it tears apart, it's going to happen. Big question, are we prepared?
I'm going to say no. I mean, I don't want to insult the people who do this for a living. I know they're doing their best with the money that they have. But it's not just money, it's also, I think there's a big whack of people, and maybe myself included to a certain extent, that just don't want to think about this. And they just keep putting off. I mean, yes, I have an earthquake kit. But you know what? I really ought to go take a first aid course. I really ought to join up with some local neighborhood group and try to get organized for this, because I firmly believe that when this happens, if we get the full magnitude 9 full meal deal, it's going to be so overwhelming that public officials are not going to be there to help you, and you need to think about the fact that you're going to have to do this for yourself.
Well, in Canada, we don't have a National Guard.
Right.
We have an army.
Right, and they're in Afghanistan.
Yes,
And
I was
they
thinking.
Closed CFB Chilliwack years ago and moved the engineers to Alberta in a budget cut. So how would you get the bulldozers and the heavy
I
equipment
don't
and all the
know.
other?
And we have a small Coast Guard, a relatively small Coast Guard.
Right, exactly.
Simon Winchester wrote the foreword to this, and he's an amazing writer. How did you meet him, and why did you write the foreword?
Well, the book that he wrote on San Francisco, called A Crack in the Edge of the Earth,
Yes.
was kind of like an inspiration to me, because that was so well done. And you know, it's like the analysis. He kind of made the San Andreas fault a character and went through all the details of how that happened. And what struck me is nobody's really done the same thing for Cascadia. It's the same size fault. It's likely to cause a much bigger earthquake. Everybody in the world knows about the San Andreas. It's like a brand name, but who knows about Cascadia? Even the people who live here don't seem to know that much about it.
And we ask the questions, where should we be? Would I be better to be at work here under the glass table? Should I be at my house, which is built on a rock, up on Grouse Mountain, in Alberta? How about Alberta?
Or Saskatchewan, to be safe.
Saskatchewan would be good, but we like living here.
I
So, what's the link between Mount St. Helens erupting and the Cascadia's fault and us? The real question: volcanic action, or a volcanic eruption, and a tsunami and an earthquake.
Well, if you go back to that plate tectonics. If my hand is the continent of North America, and the Pacific Ocean is trying to slide down underneath it, at a certain point, the leading edge of the ocean plate gets so far down, it gets really hot enough to melt the rocks. Way down here, like way inland, how far inland is Mount St. Helens? You know, a couple of hundred miles or something from the coast. Not that much, actually. But anyway, down here, the rocks melt, and they kind of boil to the surface. And when they boil to the surface, they make a volcano. When I took that Geology 101 course, the guy said the way to imagine this is, imagine you have a cauldron of soup that's been on a slow boil all day long, and the bubbles come up to the middle, and they hit the surface, and then this scum forms as it cools.
Right.
That scum is the continent.
Great. And so the buildings are crushed, and the cars are tossed, and the homes are smashed, the infrastructure is crippled, and my little earthquake kit could go missing.
Could.
So
you need more than one, Fanny. You need one in your car, you need one at home.
Apparently I do, and you're supposed to bury something in the front yard.
Is that right?
That's what somebody told me. Bury, like, because you probably won't have medicines or anything. So if you dig a hole in the front yard and even put something like honey there, because it's a natural antibiotic, it's a good idea. I mean, there's so many ideas, right?
Yeah.
Do any of us do it? That's a problem. We're great procrastinators.
Absolutely.
What do you want us to learn from this, from Cascadia's fault?
Well,
what do you want to change?
Well, okay, the thing that fascinated me about it was that there's so much more going on than just doom and gloom.
Right.
It's a fascinating detective story, how the scientists actually went from doubting that this was necessarily dangerous to proving that it was, to proving the exact time and date when the last one happened in 1700. All of that, you know, all the blind alleys they had to run down and all the stuff that they discovered, that to me was really fascinating, the mystery, the history of it. But in the end, it's not all doom and gloom. The fact is, most of us are going to survive this. We're not all going to die. A lot of us are going to live through it, and the key question is how well you endure the aftermath, which is totally a function of what you do now to get ready for it.
I know friends in California who were in the big quake, and you can't open any cupboard in their house because they're all latched now.
Yes.
After everything in the cupboards fell onto the floor and glass was everywhere.
They say the kitchen is the most dangerous place in your house because of all the glass that'll be on that floor.
Don't hang a big heavy painting over the bed because you could be under that too. It's a fascinating book, really. Because it's deeper than what we're talking about. It's about Chile and oil refineries and nuke energy and what would happen and how it all connects and goes, and Japan and all of that.
Yeah, the thing that I was talking to an emergency planner in Seychelles just yesterday, and he said, you know, people are going to expect me to do miracles, and I just can't do that. If you're lucky, you'll get a little narrow place to lie on a high school gym, assuming the gym doesn't fall down. The guy who runs the fire department in Seaside, Oregon, told a group of people who had met to discuss this, you know, they say, what are you, meaning the fire department, going to do for us? And he says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Those fire trucks sit in that hall most of the day. The roof is going to collapse in the earthquake. 20 minutes later, it's going to be 30 feet underwater. We're going to do nothing. You're going to be on your own. Great.
How nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
I wish I was bearing happier news.
Me too. Jerry Thompson, forward by Simon Winchester, Cascadia's Fault, the deadly earthquake that will devastate North America.